Hello and welcome to My First Dungeon, the tabletop role-playing podcast where we help game masters explore new systems as we build and run their very first one-shots, and then circle back around to discuss what went right, what went wrong, and how we can make their games even better. This season, we're discussing Anamnesis and solo tabletop role-playing games. And joining me once again is Emmy-nominated tabletop role-playing game designer and owner of Blinking Birch Games, creator of Anamnesis, No Wizards Here, Six Figures Under, and the upcoming Death of the Author. Very pleased to welcome back to the show, Sam Leigh. How's it going?
Hi, it's going great. Thanks for having me on again.
Of course, good to see you again. I'm very excited to talk about this game and hear your thoughts on how our radio drama version of Anamnesis came out.
I'm so excited about it. I loved it. We'll talk about it, but oh my gosh, it was so cool to listen to. I adored it.
I mean, that's my first question. What'd you think? And clearly it's a positive.
Great. It was very cool. I'm a fan of audio dramas in general. And so to hear any RPG turn into an audio drama is such a cool idea. And I feel like so many games lend themselves really well to that. Obviously hearing Anamnesis turn into an audio drama is just fantastic. I loved how things wrapped up at the end. I'll talk about that later, but it was really fun to see the progression of the story as it's being built in a way.
I've talked about this with a bunch of people, but most recently, Taylor Moore from Fortunate Horse came on the podcast, and I talked to him about, because he's really big in narrative play podcasts. So like very sound design heavy, Worlds Beyond Number, Rude Tales of Magic.
Sure.
And me and him both agree on this, in that audio dramas and radio fiction stuff often have a kind of like stilted quality to it. Like you kind of have to really get into it to kind of let the script fall away. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think with improvised games, so with actual plays, and then kind of turning those into radio dramas, it often ends up being so much better because the dialogue is like, it flows more. The story kind of has this free form move to it that is just more satisfying to listen to than a scripted radio drama. And so what I love about these games, especially in the context of like podcasting and radio, is that they form such a great, essentially, writer's room to create a cool story.
I don't know that I'd ever heard actually, to clarify, the dialogue in that game was improvised, right? Or at least a lot of it was?
Yeah, so I guess let me talk about how we recorded it, because I love the radio drama that Planet Arcana did. And when you obviously you were a participant, and when they played, you guys played with two players, but both of them were kind of active players. So each one read the prompt, and each one had a different Major Arcana card, and they kind of played back and forth off each other. What I wanted to do with this radio drama was I wanted to remove the mechanics from the recording. So essentially, I didn't want to hear the prompts being read. I wanted that to kind of like just be implied and kind of be seen in the story. So rather than hearing the prompt, you see a child swinging from their father's arm. How does that make you feel? You just see the little boy swinging from mom's arm and waving at me. So I came in kind of knowing this was an experiment that could fail. Sure. And I had Abby as my second player, so kind of a passive player that allowed me to have conversations rather than just talking to myself. I should also say on this podcast, my now fiance Abby was sitting across from me.
Congratulations.
It's very great. I guess an interesting choice to play with my fiance and then play a person who's cheating on multiple people, but it's such is life.
That's great, yeah.
So yes, the way we played was we talked very broadly about the beginning to start. Like, I'm going to walk into your tarot shop, essentially. Everything after that was improvised. Eventually, she would tell me to turn a card. We would turn over and see what it was. And then we pretty much just improvised from there. We'd very broadly talk about like kind of what it would be, but everything was just straight off the cuff, which did prove this game is incredibly good at like helping you make a character. I then chose to impose a bunch of limitations on myself. Namely, I had to be able to talk to someone and like try not to have, too many thoughts, or I didn't want to introduce additional characters.
Sure.
And what we didn't do, and what we maybe should have done, in hindsight, or if we record this again, is kind of like more actively talk about what the scene's going to be and be like, okay, here's where the scene's going to end, and we'll like improvise to get there. What we did was like okay, this is roughly how you feel at the beginning. Let's figure it out as we go.
I thought it was great. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've ever listened to anything quite like this before, because any audio dramas that I've listened to in the past have been scripted, right? Mm-hmm. Or have been closer to typical actual plays where you talk about the rules as you're playing through it. So even Tin Can Audio did an audio drama of Anamnesis based off drama. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited about it. Though they played Anamnesis, but then they wrote a script that was based off of the prose writing that they had done through playing the game. So even then it was scripted. But so I don't think I've ever listened to something like this where it was improvised, but then it was edited to make it sound like a radio drama. Mm-hmm. I thought that was, I love the idea of it. And I think it worked really well, especially, considering that it's being improvised on the spot. A lot of the dialogue felt very natural because it was being improvised. And one part that I loved was when the two characters were trying to balance the packages and they were like handing the packages off to each other. Like, I've got it. I've got it. Right. It was so funny. I was like, this sounds so natural. And there were just little moments like that throughout the show that I think really highlighted the strength of doing it this way. Mm-hmm. Kind of small moments of conversation that did feel very natural, or like also slight kind of comedic moments that came out of that. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
I do think that improvisation that way is, I guess there's always those lists online of like lines from movies that were improvised. They're always like the most impactful lines or whatever. There is something to that improvisation in art, but also like in games and in the way you play, that creates those exciting moments because you don't plan for them. It's the same way where when you're a dungeon master for like a D&D game and all of a sudden someone asks about a weird NPC and you've got to create a voice on the spot and that becomes the like NPC that everyone loves.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. Like, it's because you're panicking and you're throwing the first things out off the cuff. You're making weird choices, putting them together and creating something interesting because you have to. Like, a diamond is created under pressure. Mm-hmm. And when you're planning for things, you're trying to like make it make sense. And, here's the accent that I would do for this person. And people can feel when it's written.
Yeah.
But when it's just improvised and off the cuff and flows straight from you, it feels more real, more lived in. And there's, a reason that people love those NPCs. My big touchstone for this style of radio drama is a show that I absolutely love. It's probably my top 5 favorite things of all time. It's a show called Mission to Zix.
Oh, I have heard of Mission to Zix. I think I listened to like 1 or 2 episodes a long time ago. I need to revisit it.
It is the single best podcast out there.
Oh, I gotta take a listen.
For anyone who's interested, it's an improvised radio drama. It's a comedy, and it's kind of Star Trek, Star Wars-y. So it's, a band of ragtag adventurers who are diplomats going and doing like diplomatic missions to various planets and things in the ass end of the galaxy. So very funny, very improvised. And then the sound design is by this guy, Shane O'Connell, who is like a bad man genius. So it's incredibly cool, incredibly immersive, and wildly funny. So I've been wanting to do something like that for a while. And this really presented me that opportunity. Like, I saw that I could pull away the out of character talking, like talking about the rules and stuff that you can't really pull away in like Dungeons and Dragons as easily. Being able to have that in the background and like support the story was a very cool opportunity that I was excited to do.
That's great. I'm always looking for new audio dramas, so that one's going on my list for
Mission
sure.
Mission to Zix, 100%.
The closest thing I can think of that I've heard of is Hello from the Magic Tavern, which is a little different, but so good. I listened to that one a lot, like a few years ago. I think I would always listen to it during my commute to work. Yeah, just charming. I love that show.
For anyone who doesn't know Hello from Magic Tavern, the conceit of it is a podcaster, like guy, falls into a magical portal behind a Burger King and lands up in the magical land of Foon. And for some reason has a weak Wi-Fi signal. And so just sets up in a tavern and interviews various people with his co-hosts, Usador the Blue Wizard and Chunt the shape-shifting badger.
It's incredible.
It's incredibly fun.
My favorite part about that podcast is the fact that they're in this fantasy world, this really ridiculous fantasy world. So anytime anybody states a fact about this fantasy world, because it's all improvised, anytime anybody makes up a fact about it, that is now fact in this world. And then, if there's, I remember them listing off the days of the week. It's like Wednesday, Thursday, blunder. So, like something like that, right? And that's now blunders just, and then they talk about it in future episodes, and it's very silly.
And for anyone who's interested in like improvisation or improvisational comedy, the number one rule of improv comedy is yes and. Whatever someone says, you agree with and you heighten it. You add to whatever they say so that you create this world by building, and you're never taking anything away. You're always adding on top. And it usually the Jenga tower gets higher and higher until it falls over, usually to comedic effect. But that is good advice for playing any type of role-playing game, taking whatever anyone is saying and adding to it, but also for something like a solo role-playing game where every decision you make, you then have to take that and kind of yes and yourself, add to it, heighten it.
Oh.
And as you do that, you're going to make a very mundane decision early on, like I'm wearing nice shoes. And that will slowly get compounded to, I am super wealthy because of this, and I take care of my shoes or whatever. All those little decisions, as you add on top of each other, can become a character. And I think in something like a solo role-playing game where you're trying to find that story through these prompts that can be, they kind of come at you sideways in a way that makes you, like, forces you to think. As you start building on top of those things and just yes-anding yourself, you're creating a more and more and more specific character. And that's where you get someone that feels lived in. When something is specific, it feels real.
That's a great way to put it, yes-anding yourself. I've never thought about it that way, and it's so true. We kind of talked about this a little bit in the first episode, but just going into a story without having an idea of where you want that story to end up, I think is really, when you yes-and yourself, that leads you into directions that you don't expect to go in. And then those little details that you're talking about might be details that are completely unexpected and that give the character the character or the story elements that you wouldn't have put in there otherwise, things that are surprising to even you. And I think that also helps in creating a character that feels unique and, like you said, feels lived in.
And there is a thing to the prompts that if I decide to sit down and just write a character whole cloth without any outside structure, okay, you come up with their name, their, who they are, what they do for a living, where they live, type of thing. It's not until something comes at you a little sideways, like they saw a kid swinging from their dad's arm. How does that make you feel? Yeah. It's like, oh, okay, now you've got to actually think about what this person is like. And I think that's the real boon of these types of games and these types of prompts. They come at you from such weird angles. And with the addition of the major arcana kind of guiding you, now it's, okay, I've got this weird question I've got to think about. Okay, here's this kind of rough guide. Now I've got to figure out how to make those two things that may be incongruous, which may not quite line up. You have to make them make sense. Figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's the imagination of it.
So when I play any TTRPG, any group game, really, I tend to, whenever I make a character, usually it takes me a while to really like get in the shoes of that character, really kind of figure out what they're about, what their personality is like. And pretty much all the time, my original conception of this character, my original thoughts of what their personality is like, changes in the first 5 sessions of the game. And then it's usually a little bit longer after that I really feel like I fully understand them and that like their development starts taking like really interesting directions. So I feel the same way in that if I'm trying to make a character by myself with no outside influence, it is a little bit harder for me personally to make them feel really realized. It's not until I am playing them in a game with other people that you have those choices that they're making, you have the failed rolls that you make, you have the interactions with other characters, and that helps so much in figuring them out. And I think that, as you're saying, like these solo games kind of, they provide that. They provide kind of what the GM would be doing or what another character would be doing. They kind of provide that outside source to help you figure out your character when you're just playing by yourself.
because I end up being the game master for so many games, I rarely get to be a player. And so while I feel like I'm pretty competent as a game master, I feel like I'm not a particularly great player just because I haven't had that much practice.
Sure.
Because as a game master, you build NPCs, but like I make them I don't give them much personality. I kind of like let whatever the players bring to them immediately, like that defines who they are.
Yeah.
So I'm playing a game of Good Society in the very near future, sometime this week for a later season. Spoiler alert. And I get to be a player. I'm very excited. I haven't done that in a while. And honestly, it's taking something like these prompts and just like going through a couple of them is something I think I'm actually going to do, because I'm like, I got to figure out who this person is, because we're only playing one session. Like we're doing a one shot. So it's better to know coming in a little bit than figuring it out like 3 hours into a game. So like this could also be just like a fun little hack for anyone who wants to learn a little more about their character for any other system.
Sure. I love that idea. I know that Anamnesis was played in Friends at the Table in their Songfiel season. And it was near the end of the season for one of the characters. And it was really interesting because since the game is really written as like, this is a new character that you're making, and this is like something that you can play to help create a character or just play independently. I'd never really considered the idea of taking a character that you already know really well, that you've already been playing with in a game, and then to play Anamnesis, and then for that character to experience this memory loss and go through the game of Anamnesis. And that's what they did in the season. And it was really interesting to listen to and to see how they managed to integrate it with this already known character. So that was really fascinating. I never thought about playing it that way.
That is pretty cool. I would like to try that.
Yeah, I do too. I haven't tried it myself yet, but I think it could be interesting for if you're playing a character and you're feeling a little like stuck in their development, or if you've been playing them for a while and you still feel like you're not quite understanding them, even if you play it like non-canonically, right? I think that it could help bring out new elements to a character.
I was just talking with Abby about this before we started recording. I am very excited to play this game again without all the restrictions I've placed on myself through production. Like just playing it as it was meant to be played will be fun.
Yeah, I think especially the first time playing Anamnesis, it sounds like there was probably some trickiness to keeping that like dialogue going and all of that.
It's all the little things you don't think about where all of a sudden like you reference the third character, like, okay, are we going to do voices now? Like, no, we gotta, no third character.
Yeah.
But it was very fun. It was a very fun puzzle to solve, in the production space while also like learning this game.
Sure. It felt natural with just having the two characters. I know that there was the woman and the child, and then the people on the street, and the character who comes in at the end. But it didn't feel like not including their voices felt fine when listening to it. It still felt like it didn't feel like, oh, we have to leave these people out. It sounded great.
You're actually touching on a thing that I want to talk about because so we spoke earlier about always yes-anding yourself. So you're always building on top of things. You're not taking things away. As I was editing, so we played through the game, and then I had a big chunk of audio, and we edited it down to this what you heard last week. As I was editing, I realized there were some like unresolved plot lines that were established early on that I never addressed again. So that my character spoke a different language.
Yes.
Never addressed again.
I re-listened this morning before sitting down to this. And I caught that too. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. I think it's, anyway, sorry, but please.
So like that's never addressed again. The 7:30 p.m. date that my character had, never addressed again. It's kind of just implied that like he's walking out on another person or something. So as I was editing, because I'm thinking of like podcast producing brain rather than gameplay brain, I'm thinking, oh, we should go back and like fix that. We should go do pickups and like add in a few lines of, I shove the date card back in my pocket when, my partner walks in or something. Me and Abby talked about it. We decided to leave it as is to kind of show what the gameplay was actually like. Cause that's what the show's about. It's about showing the first time, kind of warts and all. these particular warts covered up with beautiful post-production. There's a lot of makeup on this particular wart.
Gotcha.
But that kind of did lead me to the question of anyone who plays any of these games should play them however they want. But what is your opinion on people playing like straight through and allowing those kind of loose ends to go unresolved, or going back and kind of like editing bits they wrote as they go?
I think it depends on the person and depends on the game. Primarily, I think it depends on the purpose of the game, why you're playing this game. So, if you're making a character, or if you're exploring part of yourself, or if you're just trying to make a full start to finish story, I think that each of those things have different pieces, and for some of them, it might feel better to kind of have all those loose ends connected. So I think it really depends on personal preference and the reason that you're making it. But personally, I don't really have qualms with loose ends, but I also don't have qualms with people going back and editing things. I think that's something like this audio drama. Typically in an audio drama, you have a lot of the loose ends tied up traditionally, right? That's not the case with all audio dramas. So having the loose ends open in this one was something that you don't typically see in an audio drama, but I actually thought it was really fun because for me, after I re-listened to it this morning, I was like, oh, I wonder why that character was speaking a different language. And I wonder who this date, was this date for this guy that he was seeing, or was this date for this new person? Right. So, and it kind of made me, it lets the listener have these gaps to fill in themselves and to really think about. And I think that's kind of fun too, where if you have two people listening to this and then they go back and they discuss it together, they're probably going to have different thoughts or different theories about what was going on here. If you're making a character for a game, it might be interesting to leave things open-ended to see what comes out as you play in the game, or after you've played all of Anamnesis, right? After you finish Anamnesis, you might want to go back to those loose ends and be like, oh, well, what language was my character speaking and what does that tell me about my character's background, right? So I think it can depend. It really is, I think, personal preference.
I do like having loose ends in something like this because it kind of implies a bigger world.
Yes.
There's not just a bubble that you got to observe. There's a bunch of threads that are, unresolved. They're the chord that will never have its third note and allows you to fill it in as you please. There's another whole part of my producer brain that's like, what the fuck is the answer, my guy? You got to tell me. There's no part two. Who is this date with? But I think it is fun to kind of see how those things, while those answers never get resolved, they still inform the character. The reason that I ended up pulling the tower at the end was because of that 7:30 date card. Or that was probably the earliest portion of it where I was like, okay, this guy, in my head, it was got a number from a bar while he left this guy. So in my head, I was like, oh, okay, this guy's fucking around. He's about to find out. And so, I saw the tower and I was like, it's gotta be that.
That rules. When I as being very familiar with Anamnesis, I knew that when you had the tower come up in the game, that was the card that you had chosen for this character at the end of the game. And so, a listener who isn't familiar with Anamnesis might not realize that, but for me, listening and being like, oh, you chose the tower because the tower represents this character, I lost my mind. I was really excited. I was like, oh, the tower is such a tasty choice here.
Yeah, finger looking good right at the end.
Oh, I jaw dropped, pencil down, fully was just, I loved it. Yeah, it was just, I loved, honestly, that this character was so unlikable in such a fun way. I don't really see many people play, and a lot of people play Anamnesis where their past is they did something in their past that they don't like, or they were kind of an unlikable character in their past, and then kind of in their present future, they change, they reinvent themselves, that sort of thing. I don't know that I've ever heard a game of Anamnesis where the character stays unlikable through like the entire story. And to be honest, I loved it. I loved it so much. I thought it was so fun. It was just, it was really fun to listen to, and just seeing this character kind of progressively like learn more about himself, while also kind of
learning about himself but not learning from it.
Yes. Adored it. Yeah, it was a really cool choice to make, and I really loved it.
Yeah, I found with characters that I've played most recently, like my character in our 10 Candles game, the character in this, I have found myself gravitating towards people who are unlikable, because there's a weird like comedy to that.
Sure, yeah.
It's so rife with comedy to have them like see the lesson and not learn from it.
Yes.
And remain the same despite everyone trying to help them.
Mm-hmm.
I found it to be fun. It's not who I am in real life. I think this is like a weird, let's be very clear. I'm a very nice person.
Yeah. No worries. It honestly, in listening to this, it made me want to make an unlikable character for my next campaign. Like I was listening to it, I'm like, this actually would be so much fun in a way that is like not. I think there are ways to make characters who are unlikable, who are not combative with other characters, right? And I'm like, that would be really, really fun to explore for a new game. So I think I might try that.
I think there is a freedom to unlikable characters because it opens you up to more choices.
Yeah, that's true.
Because if you're unlikable, you can still do the likable thing because you're trying to create, it's just selfish. Whereas if you're, lawful good, or if you're, paladin or something, you see a lot of choices and you have to push them to the side. Whereas if you play someone who is unlikable or is selfish or has some of these negative qualities, you can play it as great, you embracing those qualities, or maybe you're learning to let those go and you can have a bit more of an arc to it, which this character did not. Learned nothing.
Love it.
We played this game. I deliberately learned nothing about tarot cards. I opened the deck for the second time when we played, and we used I've got the rider, what is this? The Arthur Edward Waite. If you're thinking of a tarot deck, this is probably the one you're thinking of.
Yeah. Pamela Coleman Smith is the artist of the cards.
So very evocative, but the images are kind of older, they feel like of antiquity, kind of. So all we played with were the cards. As our second time seeing them, and inside this deck came with a little booklet that kind of was a very brief guide of what the cards meant. And I did this deliberately because I wanted to try it as someone who had no idea what they were doing, to see how does this game feel for someone who has never touched tarot cards or done a tarot reading before. And it was really pretty seamless. I think, we would figure out the prompts and we would turn over the cards and we'd, have to really quick reference okay, what's the 5 words this thing means?
Sure.
And something about this particular pamphlet, if you get it, there's always 6 words for each card. And the last one is always some antiquated word that is not bereavement. I was like, what is this?
It's a weird one. It's not my favorite interpretation book. I think there's some better ones out there, or at least for me. I prefer kind of different styles, but it does give you a lot to work with, though. That list of words, you can pick any one of them and be inspired by it.
And it is a broad list of words. As I was playing, I would find myself reading out the 5 or 6 words, very quickly locking onto one of them and being okay, that's the guide for this scene.
Cool. Yeah. That was the deck that I used to design Anamnesis. So it was also my first tarot deck. And I think at the time of designing Anamnesis, it was the only one I owned. And I did want to, I had considered when designing what deck to use, whether to use that deck or a different deck. And I thought that, being kind of the more quote unquote traditional tarot designs, that it would be interesting to design Anamnesis using that deck. So there are certain prompts that are inspired by certain cards. I don't know that I can name them off the top of my head, but I remember when I was coming up with prompts, at the end of that, once I had a list of prompts, I was intentional about which prompts went with which card. So some of them match up, some of them don't, but there's certain ones that after coming up with a prompt, I was like, oh, I think this one fits the Three of Pentacles best.
Sure.
And so I put it under Three of Pentacles. So but that was mostly based on the art, actually, of the original Pamela Coleman cards. So that was so you might see like a little bit of influence there if you're using that deck.
I generally tried to use the interpretations of the cards, but every now and then I did find myself looking to the art of the cards, because the art is, particularly for this deck, is very evocative. It has that feeling of religious occult. It's just the images you think of.
Yeah.
Which is evocative and which, kind of gets your blood pumping in a certain way. I loved playing it without knowing about these things. I am very excited to learn a little bit more about tarot, and what I really want, the experience I really want, is to be able to read a prompt and then turn over the card and immediately have that aha moment of knowing what it is.
Yeah.
Suspense and revelation are better when you don't have to immediately confer to a booklet. But,
yep. I agree.
But that being said, it is still very easy and quick and fun to have to look at this thing, kind of have your idea of it. So, see death and be like, oh my God, what does that mean? And then, flick through your booklet and be like, oh, okay, it means this, 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 and this. There's a fun 1-2 punch of that, of where you see something that you don't fully understand and then have someone tell you what it means and then have to conflate the two. So you have your initial reaction to whatever the card is from this evocative art, from the name, temperance, the world, the hanged man. And then you see what those things mean. And so you're always going to be influenced by kind of both, which is very fun.
Midnight Muscadines is a cozy, dark tabletop role-playing game where light and shadow intertwine in a fractured world. Players take on the roles of marmoteers, brave adventurers who journey into the untamed wildernite to collect the elusive Midnight Muscadines, craft magical jams, and protect the fragile light of Nim. Through collaborative storytelling and resourceful gameplay, players weave tales of courage, community, and the pursuit of balance. Will you preserve the light, uncover the truths hidden in the shadows, or reshape the balance of the world forever? Midnight Muscadines is perfect for fans of Studio Ghibli and Sea of Stars, who seek to capture the magic of exploration and the heartfelt adventure in a world where small heroes make a big impact. Play Midnight Muscadines as a traditional GM'd game, GMless, or even solo. Midnight Muscadines is crowdfunding now on BackerKit. Join the campaign at pandeongames.com/muscadines.
I'm Quinns of tabletop role-playing game review show Quinn's Quest, and this is Play to Find Out. Play to Find Out is an actual play podcast that brings notorious old games from the 80s and 90s back to the table. Each season of Play to Find Out, I'm joined by Emily Johnson and Rob Morgan.
Good? Nervous?
Yeah.
You both looked at each other really concerned, like you think what's about to happen is going to be unpleasant. And frankly, I think that's rude.
And together, we explore the TTRPGs of ages gone by. Our goal, to separate the TTRPGs that deserve to be remembered from those that maybe don't. I don't know, Emily. It was the 80s.
Also,
a lot of people were on cocaine. We blow the dust from decrepit systems to learn how they work. Your 100 on the encounter table bursts out. Right, you've encountered a bug. Get ready. Don't laugh.
There's one get ready for a fog.
Don't laugh. Encounter their unique quirks.
I do finger guns to cover up how I wince.
A weird thing happens as you do finger guns.
Oh no.
And I'm hoping that the Quinn's Quest community will join us in exploring these games too. If you this up, cannot describe to you how much your adventure ends here.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because the best way to learn is to play to find out. Play to Find Out is available now on the Quinn's Quest Patreon, but the first episode of each series streams for free on the Quinn's Quest YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts.
Anyway, you failed the Earth Tech roll, and you made jokes while I was doing my exposition, so you don't get to hear any more.
No. Come on.
I was shook as...
I love how the character in the game wasn't familiar at all with tarot and how that came out so many times.
Yeah.
Just getting his initial responses of seeing all of them, like the hangman being like, that's bad. That looks bad. That doesn't, it made me laugh a lot. Also, trying to pronounce, I always mispronounce it. Hierophant, yeah.
The only reason I know Hierophant is because A Season of Dimension 20 has a character whose title is Hierophant Rex.
Oh,
so
great.
I was like,
okay.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Brennan Lee
really
Mulligan.
made me laugh. Yeah. I'm like, this is me every time I draw this card. So that was great.
It's a great word, Hierophant.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I've played through this game. Very fun. I'm excited to play it again without imposing additional limitations on myself. I do want to talk a little bit about writing solo TTRPGs because I feel like this is true with most art forms and most games. The more you understand about how a thing is created, the better you can understand how it's consumed, kind of.
Sure.
So the more I understand about how you write it, the easier and better it is to play it. Mileage may vary on that statement, but I'm curious about how you approached writing some of these prompts and how you approached writing things that were evocative enough to kind of really get at the meat of a character. Because each of these things has to be a question that, again, like I said before, is kind of coming at you sideways and making you question this character in interesting ways.
Yeah.
How did you go about writing these prompts? And what did you find most effective for some of your favorite ones?
First, I created the outline as far as what each act was about. Where it was set in, what I was trying to get at with each act. Mm-hmm. And I brainstormed a few prompts for each act, but then I actually tried to really kind of put myself in the situation of each act. So the best example of this is Act 2 is about walking around town. So I actually went downtown on a nice day, downtown being a really tiny little town in rural New Hampshire. And I walked around and I had my phone and I just jotted down different prompts in my notes app as I was walking around. So I think the prompt of seeing somebody walking with a kid, that came from walking around town and seeing somebody with a kid and being like, oh, that's something that a character could remember that they have a kid or be thinking about their childhood, be thinking about their parents, right? There's a lot of different pieces of a character that you can get from a prompt like that. So, and also different buildings that I was seeing as I was walking. I came up with a lot of prompts that way. Same thing with Act 3. I just walked around my apartment and I was like, what do I see here that I could make a prompt out of? I think there's a prompt about a book on a bookshelf catching your eye. And that one I got from just walking around. I have sticky notes all over the place. And so there's a prompt about leaving a note for yourself. Unless that one was cut, to be honestly, there were some prompts that were edited and cut along the way, and to be honest, there's still a couple that linger in the back of my head.
Sure.
So that was one method that I used that really helped. The hardest act to write was Act 4 because those questions, I really wanted that act to be about reflection and how people reflect and process things and not just information, but emotion as well. If you're going through something, what do you do to help you through that? And that was difficult. It was because I had to kind of get out of my own head with it too. There's prompts there that aren't really how I would necessarily process something, but I really had to think about different methods that I've heard of other people using. I think I might have asked a couple of my friends about it too, being like, what do you do when you need to think, when you need to process your feelings? So that was definitely the hardest one to write. But I also wrote like a whole bunch of prompts for each act, and then I ended up cutting the ones that I felt were weakest. So I didn't just write 14 prompts. There were a couple of acts where I wrote closer to 18, 20 prompts, and then I cut out the ones that I didn't like as much or that I felt were a little too specific. So those were kind of my main strategies.
It's funny that you said that Act 4 was the hardest to write, because it also was like the hardest to perform and the hardest to do.
Yeah.
And part of that was we imposed the technical limitation of, by that point, Abby's character had left, so now I was alone in a room. But that is the time where in this game, everything else is coming at you. And now it's much more reflective and internal. So by the time you get to Act 4, you kind of have to have established the character enough to know how they would feel. Whereas all the other ones are kind of, here's a stimulus, how do you feel? And that's easier to imagine because you can kind of put yourself in that place. Once you're getting to Act 4, it is, you started crying. Why?
Yeah.
And it's much more internally motivated, which is harder in general because you now have to like inhabit this fictional character that you've created.
Sure.
And also, if you're performing, I now have to like talk out loud and find a way to justify it in world. So it was the hardest, but it was I think that was the time when that character came most alive. So I think everything up till then, it was kind of me as him, and also him. He's kind of like he's keeping his options open. Kind of, he's like, okay, yeah, I live in this part of town. Kind of, who knows? It's kind of. It keeping it vague because he doesn't want to, give away that he doesn't have his memory and is trying to figure shit out. By the time you get to Act 4, and by the time you get to Act 4 in our game, the only other person there who's observing him is gone. He's now got to just kind of make the calls of who he is. Whereas everything else is just kind of taking in information, figuring out like, okay, which of this do I want to incorporate into this new personality? By Act 4, you're making those choices. Like he's choosing that, oh, I guess I like war things. Oh, I guess I won this relationship.
Yeah, that line was I loved that. That was there were little lines, especially in Act 4, that like really revealed a lot about this character, and his little bit about like, oh, I won. I loved that piece. That was so interesting.
Well, and that, just that one sentence says so much about this person, because it says victorious. Okay, it's a positive thing. It's also saying like that. By claiming victory, you're implying a conflict. You're implying that there's a loser and that this is a competition. So now it says, oh, he's thinking about this in terms of competition. There's a winner, there's a loser. I've got to beat you.
Yeah.
And now it's more of a negative connotation to a positive emotion.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. I also thought that it was interesting that, he had listed out a few of the definitions and chose victory, right? Like victory was the one that he was like, oh, victory. I like victory. I'm victorious. Like, out of these, because some of them weren't as positive of an emotion. And so the fact that he picked out victory for himself was also very interesting, I thought.
And I think there were echoes of that early on, that he was always going to look for the most favorable outcome of when she's listing. I think it's whichever card, one of the options is favorable marriage.
Oh,
he's like, oh, great.
Yeah.
I'll take that. Like, yes, please. Like looking at tarot as a, menu upon which to choose rather than a reflective thing, which is why, the tragedy of him looking at the tower and being like, oh, this is nice. Oh, this looks pretty. Yeah.
The line about like liking the tower and not realizing the people falling from it was, I think, my favorite line in the entire thing.
Yeah. This is another thing with improvisation. Every now and then you just hit something, and when you hit it, it feels way better than if you had already written it. So strong recommendations for improvisation in all art forms. There's just a little bit of extra magic there that you don't get when it's been edited.
Yeah.
Which is funny because this is, a personal journey for me. When I first moved to New York City, a bunch of my friends were comedians, and a lot of them did improv comedy through like UCB, the Upright Citizens Brigade. Okay. And when you're young and in New York City and all your friends do comedy, you go to their shows. And when you're young and your friends are doing improv shows, they're usually bad. So I sat through a lot of bad improv comedy.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily that they were bad, they were learning. Like, you know,
of course.
it's a different thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And many of them have gone on to be professional comedians or have given up comedy and done other things. But it kind of tainted my view of improvisation, especially in comedy.
Okay.
And I, for a long time, had the thought that why would you ever improvise when you can write? Like writing a sketch will always do better than improv because a sketch is just improv that you edit and make better. Like, you know, the first draft is never the good draft. You're never releasing the first draft. And here I am doing an art form all about improvisation. So I've come around. And I think my naivete as a 22-year-old is coming through.
Improv is definitely something that it's like the number one thing that I strive to improve at as like a player and a GM, because my improv skills are not phenomenal, but it's something that I am. You know, playing RPGs really helps with those skills. I've improved over time, and I want to keep improving. And honestly, like playing silly characters with friends is like a really great way to do that.
Well, I've said this on the show before, and I say it in person a lot, that if you have a 3-hour conversation with someone, like you meet a brand new acquaintance, you have a 3-hour conversation at a coffee shop, you will learn far less about them than if you play role-playing game for like 15 minutes.
I absolutely agree with that. 100%. Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is because when you are in that like true like play space, like very childlike, like, hey, I've got an invisible sword, you've got a sword stopping shield, let's fuck around and play it out. So rarely in adult life is it like comfortable and easy and common to get into that pure imagination space. And what I love about tabletop role-playing games is that they encourage you to get in that space. And when they're well written and when they're well created, they make it very easy to get into that space.
Yes.
And that because it's if you've never done it before, and you know, a lot of people who are listening to this podcast about, you know, indie games have likely played a lot, and you don't realize how difficult it can be for someone brand new. But the activation energy required to get over the hump and getting out of your own way to inhabiting a character, doing a silly voice, pretending to be a thing, and like seeing the adventure in your mind can often be a lot because you haven't done it for 10, 20, 30 years. Because it's not a normal part of adult life necessarily. And that's why I really appreciate Anamnesis and other games that I've called out, you know, 10 Candles, Wanderhome, because they do so much work for you to get you to that space. Because the faster and easier you can get to that space, the less friction that it takes, the more time you can have fun and live in that like that slope, that fun slope going down. Like, you know, they get you to the top of the hill so you can just sled on down.
That's something that I also think is really nice about solo games, because if you are new to TTRPGs and you want to get into them, but you feel self-conscious about being a character in front of other people and role-playing conversation and doing that improvisation, then playing a solo game can kind of help you practice that. It can help you get into that space by yourself without other people watching, right? I think it can be personal, and you can let yourself be silly and let yourself practice making a character and telling a story through this character without having a whole group watching you.
There are many people I know who don't exercise their like creative muscles that much in this very like particular creating a fiction way. They exercise their creativity in different ways. They may paint, they may draw, they may play sports in a way that is creative and fun and fulfilling and that scratches that itch. But it's like anything, if you haven't practiced it, it's going to be tough. Like a lot of people say, oh, I can't draw. But then if you ask them, okay, how many hours this week did you practice? They'll say, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, the reason people can draw well is because they practice drawing.
Yeah.
And just practicing, or I don't even want to put it as practicing because practicing makes it sound like work. Living in exploring this kind of creativity that you might not do in a day-to-day in the privacy of your own home, kind of by yourself, gets you just that little further up the hill of making it easier and easier and easier to dive in the next time you play with your friends and stuff.
I think 2-player games are really good for this too. Once if there's somebody who you really trust, that you're really comfortable around, right? And you want to play a 2-player game with them because you don't mind feeling more silly around this person, or you don't mind kind of practicing exploring these worlds and characters with this person, then that's a great way to kind of, keep it to somebody who you trust, right? But then to have somebody who you can bounce thoughts off of, somebody who can explore with you. As we talked about near the beginning, sometimes having sometimes having another person at the table really helps for creating characters and creating worlds. And so I've fallen in love with 2-player games pretty recently, in the last year maybe, and I really want to play more of them because I think that solo games can be really intimate of an experience. You can explore things that you might not be comfortable exploring around a whole group of people. But 2-player games also, I think, are very intimate in a way. You're telling the story, you're talking about these characters with just like one other person, and the two of you together are making something just yourselves. And I think that can be really powerful. And, you can experience that in group games too, but there's something about just like two people telling the story that is really interesting to me.
I just had a conversation a couple of days ago with Jeff Stormer from Party of One.
Yep.
We had a big conversation about tabletop role-playing games, and he recommended me a number of games, including Starcrossed, which is a great 2-player game.
I love Starcrossed.
which Starcrossed has the best tagline of any game I've ever heard, that tells you everything you need to know about the game. Starcrossed is a game about two people who want to but shouldn't. And like, oh, what a great line. Whoever, I got to talk to that person because I want to know the feeling that they felt when they wrote that line.
Yeah.
But we were talking about 2-player games a little bit, and it occurred to me during that conversation that this recording was the first time I'd ever played a solo role-playing game and also a 2-player role-playing game.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Oddly enough, because, and it was a very intimate experience with someone, obviously my now fiance, I trust greatly. Yep. But me being someone who is very comfortable performing through this show, I did find myself just a little bit on the back foot of being a little more timid to start because I'm performing for an audience of one, and it's the person I'm, most comfortable with in the whole world.
Yeah.
That was a surprising emotion to feel. Also like exhilarating and fun, and it's a trust exercise between, me and my partner and stuff. But it was interesting to experience that and, have someone watching me learn a thing and also us doing it together, which was very fun, a very, very intimate and fun and creatively fulfilling process.
Yeah, I think that one thing that's really interesting about RPGs is that you can, as you're saying, you can play with the people who you feel closest with, who you're most comfortable with, who you trust the most, and still feel a little uncomfortable, a little like outside of your comfort zone. And usually like once you start playing, that kind of warms up a little bit, and but there's this, I think sometimes there's this assumption that if you have like the perfect group of people to play a game with, that everything is going to go really smoothly. But that sometimes it takes that practice. It takes that warming up. It takes that kind of initial first session, initial first hour of the game to kind of get the ball rolling on that. And games that, you mentioned like 10 Candles Wander Home, right? Games that kind of like help you set that up a little bit more, give you questions to consider to help you get more comfortable in your character at the table, I think are really beneficial, as opposed to something, like Dungeons and Dragons. It's a little bit tough sometimes to start a new campaign with new people who you've never met before. It's tough to start a new campaign with new characters, even if you all know each other really well. I feel like there's always this initial, like, do we start in a tavern, right? Like, what is the first thing? How do you, and the first in-character conversation is always like a little tricky, right? It's always a little bit difficult to start. At least that's been my experience. I am not, as I mentioned before, I'm not a master of improv. So sometimes I find it a little bit tricky to really, like, when you first dive into it. But fortunately, you know, with the right group of people, that warms up pretty fast normally.
D&D is a great game. There are a lot of people who would disagree, but D&D is trying to serve a lot of masters with everything they put out, and it's also trying to be the Swiss Army tabletop role-playing game. Yeah. It has mechanics that are very robust that can do kind of every game. The problem with that is that it requires so much extra work from the game master and the players to get from Swiss Army knife to, okay, which comb am I trying to pull out of this to play? Whereas with something like Anamnesis, 10 Candles, Wanderhome, every aspect of the writing of the game is pushing everyone towards a single path, not in a way that is constricting or railroady, just in a way that's saying, okay, here's the type of fun you're playing. Are you looking for a tragic horror game? Great. 10 Candles, everything about 10 Candles, from the mechanics to the writing, tells you the tone.
Yeah.
Anamnesis, are you looking to like explore yourself, starting from tabula rasa as a palimpsest and come back together into something? Great. Every single aspect of that game is carving you towards that path. And it is a real boon. I say the word boon a lot recently, and I like it though, so I'm going to keep doing it. It's a real boon to players and game masters to have someone do some of that cognitive and emotional heavy lifting that is so tough at the very start of something that is already out of everyone's comfort zone a little bit, so that all you have to do is kind of give that little tap, and then the ball's rolling down the hill.
Yeah.
So it is the difference between a role-playing game and a very well-written role-playing game is how much lift you're able to give to the game master and to the players. And I think Anamnesis does a great job of getting you right to the edge. You have to just give that little tap and then down the hill.
I think that too, that with games like D&D, right, that are trying to be the whole Swiss Army knife, that it is, you know, a lot of GMs will homebrew things, right? But there's a lot of the foundational mechanics, right? Like how a class works in D&D, how dice rolls work in D&D, right? A lot of that stays pretty similar. Yeah. When in games like Dread, for example, which we mentioned in the first episode, Dread, Wretched and Alone. Yeah. So those, when you're designing a game that has one very specific setting or tone or genre in mind, you can design it from the ground up with that in mind, and that includes the mechanics, right? So like I'm sure that somebody has done it before. I have not yet seen a D&D game use a tumbling dice tower. Tumbling block tower. I am sure that somebody's done it, because it sounds like a great idea to like, your characters are trying to run from something or, whatever, right? You're doing a heist and the block tower is kind of like your clock, like a clock from Blades in the Dark in a way, right? Where you have to pull from the tower. Anyway, I think I might try that sometime, but basically the foundational mechanics of these games, when a game is written knowing the exact tone that it's going for, you really see that in the text, and you see that through the tumbling dice tower. I keep saying dice tower. You see that through the tumbling.
I've infected both of us.
That's why. The tumbling block tower in Dread, in Anamnesis, the tarot cards are super important to it. When I was first brainstorming Anamnesis, the tarot wasn't what I originally started with. It came very quickly in the development of the game, but when I was first thinking about, okay, I want to tell a story about somebody learning about themselves after memory loss, I kind of went through my little Rolodex of materials in my brain, and knowing that I wanted to limit down to just one or two materials, and landed on tarot cards because it just felt so tonally correct for what I was going for. And so that's something that you really get from a lot of these indie games. They're very specific, and that's what makes them so unique and interesting.
Great. Sam, before we get out of here, can you tell the people what else you're working on and where they can find you online if they want to learn more?
I am working on Death of the Author, which is a game that uses the same mechanics as Anamnesis, but tells a very different story about a character who is trying to gain agency over their story. But also, I am writing a game as part of the Far Horizons co-op, another solo game This one is actually a Wretched and Alone game, so it's a hack
Very
of
fun.
Christmas That's the Wretched. Yes, and it is a kind of like an absurd comedy game in the style of like Welcome to Night Vale that is about being a research assistant and working with participants. I am pulling on my 5 years of research assistant experience, and so the game is kind of this comedy about being a research assistant, but it also teaches a little bit about what a research assistant actually does. There's a lot of games out there that are about mad science and about like weird science, and I feel like there's not a lot of good media out there that really actually describes what you do, you know, like how you recruit people and you go through the informed consent process. And anyway, I won't talk about it at length, but so obviously it's got this absurdism to it, but within that absurdism, there are a lot of nuggets of reality that I am trying to put in this game form. So I've almost finished the rough draft of that, and the expected release of that is May. It's called Outliers, just at the start.
Love it. Outliers.
Yep. So those are kind of the big ones I'm working on now. If you want to check out more of my work, you can find my games at blinkingbirchgames.itch.io, and I'm on pretty much all platforms at Goblin Mixtape.
Especially check out the Goblin Mixtape TikTok for great breakdowns of indie TTRPG games.
Thank you.
And that is all for this season of My First Dungeon, Anamnesis. You can follow us on Twitter, as always, at My First Dungeon. If you want to hear a little bit more from me and Sam, you should consider subscribing to the 20-sided newsletter, our bi-monthly newsletter about tabletop role-playing games, game design, and cool things going on in this great community. Subscribers get access to extended interviews with our guests, as well as exclusive first looks at games that Elliot and I are designing, and so much more. We had a great conversation after our first interview. It's like an extra half hour, so if you've liked this series and you haven't heard that already, go check it out. And if you like this show, the very best way you can support us is by going to your podcast player right now, clicking follow, and leaving us a review. It helps more people find the show and lets us know that you like what we're doing. And as always, remember, if you're having fun, you're already doing it right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
If you're hearing this, that means you have listened to every last second of this episode, and that probably makes you a fan of this show. Well, if you're a fan and you like what we're doing and want to help others find it as well, then consider leaving us a 5-star review over on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. Getting more ratings really does help more people find the show, and reading your nice words about the things that we put out into the world makes us feel all warm and good inside, and we want more of those good feels. So head on over to your podcast player of choice and leave us a 5-star review. Thanks.